hey there. Welcome to another episode of the After Hours Chats podcast. Tiffany here, and I am here with a really amazing person. And we've been following each other for quite some time. For quite some time, I would say. And we've been seeing each other's posts and we finally got a chance to talk in person. It was like a few months ago when you had me on one of your podcasts. So I wanted to have you on to the After Hours podcast because, you have such a really cool, I think, very just unique creative style, and it's something that I've always enjoyed, and I wanted to have you on to maybe talk about it more, and even how your creativity has shaped you into the person that you are today and everything, the amazing person that you are. So introduce yourself, and absolutely, and just talk about how you got into, because you're an author, a writer, advocate, everything, and
a lot of hats.
And sometimes it's hard to keep up with everything that you're doing, girl, but just kind of tell a little bit about yourself and how your writing not only became a form of maybe self-expression for you, but also pretty much became your livelihood, whether you're writing a novel or whether you're writing like a commentary piece or something, how that has kind of shaped you into who you are right now. So,
well, to start, I'm Sai Marie Johnson, and like you said, I'm an author, a poet. I've done screenwriting. I wear a lot of hats. But really, to get started on my writing career and what brought me to this point. So I've always been I was a very creative, imaginative child. I had I even remember for a little while I had a make-believe friend, probably from like 3 to 4, but then when I got to 7, they went away because I had real friends then.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and I was an only child for a long time. I'm not anymore, obviously. I have several siblings that are younger, but my firstborn brother was born when I was 5, so I had a long time where it was just me. And my mom was, big on storytelling. She's part Native and everything. So big on storytelling, big on singing and songs and stuff like that. So that was kind of part of my natural raising. And it was really encouraged by most of the people in my life. I remember being taken to the library when I was like 5 and being encouraged to read. And so I really, from that, just having that really natural imagination and having a mother that told stories just orally as she did, and then being taken to the library, I was immersed in storytelling from basically birth. And to me, it just became such an important, vital, I felt so much joy and happiness going into the library. And I have had a tumultuous childhood. I mean, some about that.
A little bit.
Different types of things happened, but I always knew that the library and books were a safe space. And that ended up moving me forward as time went on. And of course, my biggest inspiration is Anne Rice, and I know you know that. I got a hold of books way before.
I know you love Anne Rice, yeah.
And I got a hold of her books when I was like 8, but I was reading at an advanced level because I had started, forming this interest in storytelling and then reading from such a young age that by the time I was, 8, 9 years old, I was reading adult length novels, 500, 600 word novels, and I'm speed reading them. Like by the time I got into accelerated reader, I was reading like 8 or 10 books a week. I was like one of the top readers. So I was introverted and nerdy. And also because I moved around a lot, and because of my childhood, for a brief period of time, I was in foster care, probably about 5 months. I got bullied a lot. I moved around constantly, so even when I did make friends, I was often moved away and didn't get to keep them for very long. And so books became, and especially authors like Anne Rice, became a constant that was always there. And no matter where I was at, I could go to a library or find a book by one of these people and, kind of feel centered and calmed again. So it helped with my nervous system. And of course, I developed anxiety and PTSD from different things I experienced. But
Mhm.
my journey into writing really began in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, honestly, because
Mhm.
when I was bored, I didn't just daydream. I would jot down exactly, whatever I was thinking, whatever was in my head.
Yeah.
That's when poetry really started to kind of
Mhm.
emerge. Um, and I actually created my first book at the age of 5 in kindergarten, and
Ooh.
a project I called My Family. It was just
Aw.
yeah. It was just like a simple like I took construction paper and
Yeah.
I stapled it together and I made
Uh-huh.
my book cover, my back page, and then I drew the illustrations and I wrote the story. And it was just hand-drawn illustrations and little short sentences, but that was my first
Yeah.
book, if you will.
Mhm.
And then by the 8th grade, there was a project that I had, and I began experimenting with the physical craft of like book binding, and I took
Nice.
foam board, and we had to create like a poetry project and collect
Mhm.
poems from
Yeah.
different poets that we liked or whatever, and then even attempt to write
Mhm.
our own if we thought that we could. Which I think
Okay.
I collected like 15 different contemporary poets and
Mhm.
maybe like a couple of old, because I remember that there was, definitely like
Yeah.
and I mean there was a lot of different people. But then at the end, I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and write one, and it was called Reminisce. And
Okay.
I was like at the precipice of 14, 15 years old when I wrote that. And my
Mhm.
mom seen it and she watched me go through all of it, like the binding it together from the foam boards and getting all the poems and
Right.
all together and making the whole design. And she's you're really really interested in just like the whole craft of making a book. And I was like, well, this is the ultimate self-publishing.
Right.
And
Yeah.
like I'm 14 years old, right? So
Uh-huh.
and of course I got an A on that. My teacher was really impressed. And
Yeah.
just that early hands-on spirit just kind of stayed with me, if you will. So
Mhm.
today, I mean, I've got 30 books on the market. I've been involved in multiple anthologies, especially this year. I've done really well
Yeah.
this last year.
Yeah,
Um,
I've lost track at like how many anthologies you've been in because it seems like every day your story's in a new anthology. And it's like, no, that's really cool though, because that can get your work out to more people. So
right.
yeah. Hmm.
Right. And I mean, I'm proud of that. These were all things I knew I wanted to eventually do, like
Yeah.
see where it goes. And people have been like, why haven't you
Mhm.
just stuck with one niche? And the reason why is because I mean, I'm just a creative person. If something interests
Right.
me, I'm gonna try it out because why not? That's kind of the way I see
Yeah,
it. So,
absolutely.
I mean, now I'm a podcast host. I've done investigative journalism,
Yeah.
and writing remains my most vital form of
Hmm.
self-expression. Like that is I do reels and videos and things like that now, the podcast too, but ultimately all of these things I still have to lean on writing, just for the production and everything. And
Hmm.
that's always going to be, I think, the center point for me. I've kind of
Hmm.
transitioned, obviously, from stapling construction paper to a professional career. Um,
Yeah.
but the core remains the same. It's a drive to document the world with total authenticity.
Yes. No, that's good because, we definitely need more authenticity now. And I've even discussed this with a couple other people on this podcast too. And also another author friend of mine, Andrea Dean Von Scoy, who I've had on here a couple times. And she's kind of on this mission to bring authenticity and integrity back to the whole influencer thing because as
Yeah,
I'm sure like that's just gotten completely out of hand because we went from the early days of like YouTube where YouTube and social media, like those early days where everybody was just creating because they loved it and everything, and of course everybody, we all need to make money, we all need to pay bills and everything, but there's a difference between, okay, I'm doing this as my passion and, and I'd love to make a living at it. There's a difference between that and just plain greed. And not too many people can relate to oh, look at my $3,000, $10,000 handbags, you know.
no.
Yeah, not too many people. And I think a lot of people we're seeing influencer fatigue, we're seeing Hollywood celebrity fatigue, we're seeing just people like they just don't want it anymore. They want that authenticity. They want that integrity. Um and I was even, I think when I had on Life Sorby, who's the frontman of the band Tempest on here, he and I were kind of talking about it. And I say, this is why I do this, is because I like to have these authentic conversations and maybe we can, bounce around ideas and have that authenticity there. And well, I don't think, I'm necessarily going to be single-handedly bringing back that authenticity. I'd like to think I have like a small part of it. And you too, I mean, with what you do, I mean, whether you're writing, like I said, fiction or, like a commentary piece or something, just
Yes.
having that and just having that authenticity and just that rawness that I think a lot of people miss. Like I don't like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that that's absolutely true. And it's like, so I've had some interesting experiences the last few weeks. Um,
Yeah, we were
and
talking about it before we started recording. Yeah.
yes. And something that I thought about with that is
Hmm.
I had actually put in an application to try to work with a media company, and it was the
Hmm.
day after I came back from Los Angeles doing the
Uh-huh.
demonstration coverage at No
Yeah.
Kings this
Uh-huh.
last time in March.
Yeah.
And they wrote me back and they said, "We're sorry, after looking over your resume and everything, we don't think you have quite the grit for the kind of
What?
investigative reporters that we need. And this is very
What?
activism and political lined." And I didn't even email back because I just laughed to myself.
Oh,
And you know what just happened to me.
yeah. Oh my good. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Whoa. Okay. What kind of grit were they looking for?
I don't know. I mean,
I mean,
I was pretty dumbfounded because as
yeah.
press, I mean, I was detained and I was released without charges, of course, but
Yeah.
I have lost some followers. I'm not going to lie to you. We're here to be authentic.
Yeah.
Because people immediately upon seeing that happening, because it was live streamed, were like,
Right.
oh, they want to jump ship. But see, that's the transparency I'm talking about right there is
Yeah.
they didn't even give the chance to hear me out. I mean, and if you watch the
Right.
videos, you could see that I wasn't doing anything that wasn't within my civil rights, that wasn't
Yeah.
within what I was
Hmm.
supposed to be doing. And I got tear gassed directly in the face
Oh my
without
God.
hearing. So I don't know
Wow.
what they meant by that. To me, I mean, a person that's an independent journalist that's out there
Hmm.
know that when I say that, that means that I spend my own money to get down
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Um, unless people want to, fund me, which would be wonderful. But besides the
Hmm.
point, I do these things and I spent my own money to get down there and to be
Hmm.
there for around the table with the AOTR for Authors of the Resistance. Um,
Uh-huh.
and then to be told that they were looking for someone more gritty, I was just like, this shows you how people aren't really paying that much attention to the people
Right.
who are authentic and transparent. And then they say
Yeah.
things like that, and it seems like it really is leaning more into that. Well, do I just not fit whatever your imagery is of that? Because to
Right.
me, it doesn't make sense because everything I did should be definitively gritty.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And and it's really, like I said, like it's really mind-boggling because like you said, like what exactly were they looking for? Or were they looking for like a certain like, type, or something like that? Or or were they looking like for like your typical influencer type? Or it's one of those things where you know, it really goes to show you, like you said, how people really don't pay attention. People really don't like go and look and see what you're doing and, all the podcasts you're doing and the blogs and even like your fiction works and everything, because, you've done quite a bit. You're very experienced and, you'd probably make somebody a great journalist, but it just kind of goes to show you it's very much kind of like a popularity contest
It
still with
is.
all of that. And the thing too is, and I've commented on this before, with past episodes too. It's like, I think people are wanting to return to that sense of balance there where, and I always bring up the MySpace days, and not that the MySpace days were without, their toxicness, because, it's like, Y2K, that whole era. I mean, that was, plenty toxic in its own way. However, I think with, as far as like social media goes, and social media is, I have nothing against social media. I'm not one of these people who are going to be like down with social media, but I think there needs to be a balance, kind of like with the MySpace days. And I'm sure you remember too, with MySpace, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, people can go online, they can enjoy some content, they can check in on like what their favorite people are doing. I think at the time it was like Tila Tequila or something, somebody like that, like,
Right.
or Paris Hilton or something. They could like check in on like what their favorite artists are doing. But then they also go and live their outside lives too, you know? And I think that that's what we need. We need a return to that type of balance, because, and that's the thing, because I know some people, and I'm sure you've heard people say, oh, we need to just get rid of social media and everything was so much better before social media. No, it really wasn't, because all the stuff that's coming to light right now is all stuff that it was happening prior to social media. It was happening, but it was under the radar. And it's kind of thanks to social media and, and alternative media and all that stuff, that all this stuff is now kind of being forced to come to light, because people are on TikTok and stuff like demanding answers, as to what all's going on. And to return to like just blissful ignorance, to me, like, that's not going to help anything.
No. No, and
Hmm.
these are generational things. Like these are
Right.
things we have had through consistent generations. We continue to have some toxic problems. And if we
Hmm.
don't get to the root of the cause of those things honestly and really
Right.
be fully honest with all of ourselves that we need to fix things.
Hmm.
America especially has a lot of shadow work to do.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah,
um
we talk about shadow work a lot on this podcast, so yeah. And
but
my
I
other
mean,
one too, so yeah.
it's definitely
Hmm.
like that, and I think that
Hmm.
everyone is really, well, not everyone, we still got some of them that wanna stay stuck in the dark, but I
Yeah.
think everybody is really starting to kind of illuminate a little bit and realizing
Right.
there's there's something that's gotta be done, like, what is wrong within me that I can fix to make
Hmm.
everything in my collective better, because we are a collective.
Yes. Well, even, and I often bring this up, Michael Jackson's song Man in the Mirror, you
Yes.
know. I always tell people, you know what? Listen to that song, look at those lyrics, because you have to start that change within yourself. You can't be, pointing fingers at everybody else, when you yourself, might have some serious work to do. And that's something I try to be mindful of every day. And that doesn't mean don't point out corruption where there is. But, at the same time, you can't be looking at somebody who, like, oh, well, you have too much black eyeliner on for my taste, or, oh, you're a goth, so you must be like a devil worshiper, blah blah blah. It's like, which, like, yeah, exactly. It's like, yeah, it's like it's just all these ridiculous like stereotypes that, people like try to police other people on and police people's life choices. And it's just kind of like, how does that affect your life?
It's that satanic panic thing, though, and I think
Yeah.
that's coming back a lot, and the irony is, it's just like you just said, there are all these stereotypes, and
Hmm.
really the people doing the most malicious things are the
Yeah.
ones that look like everyday white men most of the
Hmm.
time, like,
Yeah. Yeah. They're a lot of them, I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them are like the ones that are like wearing the suits and presenting as, these family men and all that stuff. And
look at Eric Swalwell right now.
yeah. Hmm.
I said something
Yeah.
about it. I said, he said that he's so sorry. And I said, that Rihanna lyric comes to mind. Baby, you're only sorry you got caught.
Right.
Like,
Yep.
and again, they're allegations, but we believe women. So I feel the
Hmm.
investigation's just going to pan out to show us what we usually find.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and that's the thing though. It's like kind of, kind of like what you were saying. It's just society in general has shadow work to do, not only as a collective, but as an individual. And, if you still find yourself like defending these people, it's like, okay, that doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it does mean that you need to take a step back and be like, okay, yeah, why am I so resistant to believing that things weren't just all like sunshine and roses in, in like the
Right.
government systems and all that stuff. And, I why was I so resistant to believe that, there's all of these, underlying, just little seedy, like all this seediness going on. It's like all a big facade, like why am I so resistant? And that's the thing. And that's really, I think, what a lot of people are being called to do right now. But it's just, are you going to be an avoidant, or are you actually going to really go within and, and really be
Like,
honest with yourself?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that plays into even my activist role. Like, are you going to be
Mhm.
activated to be your most authentic self when it
Yeah.
comes to like, or are you going to continue to shrink? And another thing to point out here is how many people might have the father wound, and that be the reason why they even chose to
Yes.
go towards, voting for someone like him. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that desperation to have that, because so many people refer to
Mm-hmm.
him like he's a father figure, and
Right.
personally see why. But when you look back,
Yeah.
step back without judging, and you actually go, well, maybe these people have a father figure wound,
Mm-hmm.
then those are things that make it easier to understand a little bit why people are the way they are, not excusing it
Yeah.
all.
Right.
Um,
Of course. Yeah.
but people have to want to get to that point. And I did an interview earlier on my own podcast on the Mind of Sai Marie
Mm-hmm.
earlier today, and
Mm-hmm.
interviewed Lou Balcom, who is a 25-year relationships expert and author, and he does marriage
Mm-hmm.
counseling. But we really talked mostly about the difference between inspiration and transformation, and how
Yeah.
inspiration, you can be inspired by someone, but that only lasts for a little while, as opposed to
Right.
transformation. When you're bringing
Mm-hmm.
information into a person's life that can
Yeah.
enlighten them and push them to
Mm-hmm.
be motivated to transform their life, that's a
Mm-hmm.
different entirely, because inspiration is a moment, a momentary, oh, and then you feel a compulsion, but it doesn't
Right.
usually lead you to actually moving forward to make those courageous changes and do that shadow work. And so I thought that
Mm-hmm.
was a really unique, way to put that I hadn't heard before, and I wanted to share that on your show because
Yeah.
it aligns with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing too. I can really see like where you're coming from with that, because I think people in general they tend to, I think we have become so used to, as a collective, maybe not, you and I, because, I mean, well, I mean, nobody's perfect, I still have, there's still work on myself that I'm doing, but I think just in general, like as a collective, we have become like so addicted to external validation and the feeding of our own egos, and looking for somebody outside of ourselves, like to save us from ourselves, please. And it's like, no, you have to, nobody's coming to save you.
It really is. He said something else too. He said, people come because they're trying to get over pain, but what they need to realize is
Mhm.
the only way you transform is through the pain.
Through the pain, yes, we gotta. And that's the thing too, and I I agree. Like I think that, we're seeing that pain right now, just with everything going on. We're seeing that pain right now. And the question is, it's like, who is going to choose to transform through the pain. And it's kind of like that year of the fire horse, you know, it's like
Yes.
you're either going to transform through that fire or you're going to get dragged by the horse if you don't, you know, do the actual inner work. And we had that opportunity to do that inner work in the year of the dragon. And then last year in the year of the wood snake, we had that opportunity. And, you know, but the wood snake, I don't know about you, but I found that, you know, shadow work during the wood snake was more like, okay, you know, you're just going to go really deep and allow yourself to just kind of like curl up in a blanket and make yourself into a blanket burrito while all the gunk and stuff comes to the surface. And then you're going to like journal about it and let it go. For me, shadow work during the year of the horse is a little bit different. The year of the fire horse, it's a little bit different. It's more action oriented, where it's like, okay, I have this coming to the surface. Okay, write about it. Okay, but then I actually have to do something about it instead of just letting it come and be there and shed, you know, kind of shed off of me. Like I have to do something to burn that away. You know, how has like that shadow work and transformation, you know, been for you? Like say in the year of the horse versus the year of the wood snake.
So last year, especially post a lot of my family members voting MAGA, some of which
Okay.
were really close that I was okay. To give a little insight, I've been going to therapy for a long time and I have a
Hmm.
mother wound. I love my
Yeah.
mother very much, but she would agree we have a very tense relationship.
Hmm.
Um, and so I had in 2024, I had
Hmm.
went and visited my mom in Tennessee, and my mom had come to Oregon to see me.
Hmm.
And I was trying to repair that relationship, and I had talked to my therapist for a long time about how I wanted to do that. Okay, so with that background,
Hmm.
in 2025, after and I didn't find out at first that she didn't vote. She actually voted for a third party candidate, but my sister did vote MAGA and she was very proud of it. She even wore a shirt that said Daddy's home and posted on social media knowing what I do. And I was like, my heart broke.
Okay.
Um, I really wanted to be, this is my sister, you know, I really wanted to
Um,
be close with her. And after having going back to Tennessee and spending time with her, I thought that we were regaining the relationship that we had had when we were younger. But
yeah.
then she voted for MAGA and she was
Hmm.
supposed to be coming to visit me that summer, which would have been summer of 2025.
Uh-huh.
I went into the wood snake year having put the boundary down, telling my sister, and I went to her directly, I don't think we can have the relationship that we had ever again now.
Hmm.
She immediately pushed back, why? And I said,
Yeah.
you really don't want me to answer that question. And she's like, no, I need to know why. And I said,
Hmm.
well, look at the picture that you just posted on social media about Donald Trump and look at what I
Hmm.
do for a living. I can't. I literally can't. It's not just what I do for a living.
Mm.
I have Hispanic children.
Right. Okay.
Like
Mm.
there's so many levels. I have children that have Duchenne muscular dystrophy that are wheelchair bound and it's a terminal
Oh
illness.
my gosh. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you look at fascism
Right.
and you look at undesirables,
Hmm.
my children meet every marker.
Okay. Hmm.
So I was just like, I told her and I said, well, it's because you voted for a Nazi. I straight up said it like that.
Yeah.
Um, and she goes, he's not a Nazi. And I said, yes, he is. Have you read Project 2025?
Mm.
And she's like, well, if that's how you feel. And I was like, there's nothing more I can say. You've made your decision. I have to respect that that's who you are. And it's not someone that can be around me or my family.
Right.
So went into 2025, what was supposed to have been a reunion year ended up being a total, complete shedding year. I have not spoken to my sister once
Yeah.
since, well, not that day, like a week after that day, because that was when I seen that they were actually going to be banning Anne Rice's books as part of their book banning that they're doing. And I went to her and I said, see, you can't say
Really?
nothing to me now. They're going to ban my favorite author, the only reason why I got through suicide sometimes. And what do you
Right.
say about that? She
Yeah.
literally asked me.
Oh my gosh.
Literally,
Wow.
yeah. So I went into snake year with that, and I have been working on a lot of things. I've been single for a long time. I decided to become a voluntarily celibate single woman to
Yeah.
not because I'm not sex positive, but because I wanted to work on myself. Um,
Yeah.
I really wanted to call back all of the parts of myself
Yeah.
and be the strongest whole. Something told me I needed to become the strongest, wholest person I could be for what was coming.
Right.
By the time we get to snake year,
Mhm.
I did start Authors of the Resistance last year.
Uh-huh.
And that was something I felt compelled to do, but
Mhm.
I didn't do as many boots on the ground events last year as I did in 2020. And
Okay.
this year I'm already
Mhm.
already I've went to Los Angeles and, been boots on the ground deep in the assignment.
Yeah.
I've
Mhm.
things here in Eugene. I'm probably going to Portland soon. I intend
Yeah.
on to LA again,
Mhm.
as many times as I possibly can, and probably to DC too, because I ultimately want to march on DC, and I never have. To this
Oh,
point in my life, I have never done that. And of course, I work with Dave the Viking now, who is from DC.
okay.
So, um, he's we're basically partnered together for a lot of these strategical things on what we're doing with activism. But I'm also doing
Oh,
stuff with
interesting.
him, kind of bringing him into the book world, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, talking to him and everything, we have a lot of plans, and I intend on, going to DC and doing those things. But all of
Mhm.
that is how it's definitely shown me the difference in where I was more sedentary, more drawing in and dealing
Yeah.
having to kind of shed my old skin, um,
Right.
and going through all those evolutions of, not having my sister to talk to. And
Yeah.
I had several arguments with my mom before, off and on, before I finally was told directly that she didn't even vote for him. And I said, well, you could have just told me that from the beginning. She's like, well, you
Mhm.
would have listened anyway, which is really not true. But this is the evidence.
Right.
We get caught up in our worries and our fears and our anxiety, and it
Yes.
causes these things to happen. So
Mhm.
for the fire horse year, I'm feeling a lot more direct about things. Like,
Right.
I see somebody running away because they're scared of that, I'm telling them in that moment, why are you scared?
Mhm.
Why are you trying
Right.
to run? Can you not just sit with me in this space for a minute? Because if you
Mhm.
sit with me in this space and this discomfort for a little bit, we
Yeah.
can actually get you through it. And that's pushing through
Mhm.
that pain.
Yeah. Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I have a phoenix tattoo, so the fire horse and being
Mhm.
burnt up is no big deal to me. I just be reborn again anyway.
Right.
But knowing that I can burn other people up, though, that's why I feel like that's my compulsion. I'll be okay. I'll get stronger
Yeah.
through anything. But I
Right.
know that because I have that resilience and the
Mhm.
creative energy that I have, that makes me a strong force to be able to go out there. And while I'm documenting, there are things that you guys don't see. I'll
Right.
tell you a little anecdote right now. So
Uh-huh.
I got taken into the MDC. I was there for 4 hours in zip ties. I was detained right there in the same
Yeah.
facility they're taking
Wow.
immigrants into.
Uh-huh.
Um, but when the captain realized I was press and saw my press vest after me sitting there for so long,
Mhm.
realized that they had made a mistake. So
Like,
he
oop.
basically had me move over to this bench. And on this bench that
Right.
I was sitting on, there was a young man. Now, I don't know how old he was, but I
Okay.
assume he was between 18 and maybe 21. He was,
Mhm.
up the same age as my third born son, who's 19.
Right.
So I sit down, and this kid's maybe 5 or 6 feet further down the bench. It was a long bench, like a really long one.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and he speaks up and he goes, ma'am. And of course, I'm hard of hearing, so I wasn't sure. So I turned towards him and,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm talking to you. And he's all, do you mind if I ask you a question? And I was like, sure. He's all, why
Mhm.
did they make you move over here? So I explained to him that I'm press, and they realized that they should not have even detained me because I didn't do anything wrong. And they
Yeah.
were going to be having LAPD media talk to me before
Mhm.
they release me with no charges. And he's all,
Yeah.
oh. So then he goes, well, this is my second time getting caught for protesting. He's like, can I
Mhm.
ask you another question? And I said, sure. He goes, are you a mom? And I said, yes. And he
Uh-huh.
said, if your kid got arrested for protesting, what would you say? And I
Uh-huh.
was like, well, I'm an open minded parent.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would obviously want to listen to what my kids have to say. And also, I'm obviously in the same place as you right now. So,
Yeah.
I might not be the perfect person to answer this because parents that are stricter have different belief systems might be harder.
Mhm.
Uh, but I can tell you the best thing to do would be to just be honest. And he goes,
Right.
I've been thinking about that. He's like, you want to know what's funny? And I said, what's that? He goes, I was just looking into classes for photojournalism last week. And I smiled and I said, this is what you do when you
Mhm.
go home, when you get out of here and your parents pick you up. You tell
Mhm.
your mom exactly what happened, but you do it with conviction and you do it honestly and you take
Mhm.
ownership. That's accountability. And then you tell her,
Yeah.
I'm going to go sign up to become a photojournalist and go do it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And he smiled at me and he nodded. Well, then finally it's my turn to walk out, and I'm walking out with
Yeah.
a press vest, and everybody's looking at me, including the officer that abused me. Um,
Right.
and the look on her face was just, oh no, I messed up. You could just see it.
Yeah.
And I look at the kid because as I'm walking past her, I held my head high, I smiled, and I looked right back at the kid and I said, hey, kid, it's all going to work out. And he smiled and he goes, I know, thank you. Those are the things that matter the most, Tiffany.
Mhm.
Like those
When you
moments
can
of
inspire somebody like,
yeah,
like that. Yeah. Mhm.
because I know that that inspired that kid, but also that's going to lead to transformation. I know it will.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And and the thing is, it's kind of, like I said, all of this stuff, like this underbelly is being pushed up to the surface. And, it is giving people an opportunity to either transform or get dragged if you want to be an avoidant and just kind of close your ears and be like, la, 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 I can't hear you, Um, I don't see that ending very well, if I'm being perfectly honest, and the thing is, it's like, and yes, it is uncomfortable to look at yourself. Yes, it is uncomfortable to, acknowledge, where you might have some like wounds and some faults and yeah, I mean, trust me, I'm constantly, digging things up about, myself and things that, I'm dismantling and everything. And I've dismantled quite a bit, because, we know like this whole matrix that we live in, it lives to just really indoctrinate you to the point to where, I mean, pretty much from the time you're born. I mean, you're made to just, instead of looking to yourself as like an authority figure and to your, and trusting, yes, everything is external. It's like, oh, trust this authority figure, trust that authority figure. And we're not taught to develop, any of that within ourselves. It's like, and it's not until like you're well into adulthood that you realize, oh crap, this is what I've been doing all this time. I mean, I've always, to an extent, never really took to authority very well.
To that.
I mean, to an extent, I've always, been kind of like, well, why should I listen to you? But to really come full circle with that, like it often happens when you're well into adulthood and you're just kind of like, man, why wasn't I wish I was taught this like sooner, like when I was a kid, to really hone this, really hone like hone your intuition, just really, hone like, your higher self or whatever you want to call that, and just really learn how to embody what is authentically you. And I just think it's such a, oh my goodness, like when you realize just how deep all of that goes and how, we're encouraged to seek that external validation. I mean, like, school is a perfect example of that, you
School
know?
indoctrination center.
Yeah. And, and I know people, like to make fun of like people that homeschool, but let me tell you, hey, that's, at least that's outside of the indoctrination system.
Having done both, neither way is
Hmm.
perfect. I mean,
Yeah.
go to school and then you're an introvert and everybody's bullying you. That's just part of the
Right.
why I got taken out and put into homeschool.
Mhm.
And then I got
Yeah.
turned around and I no longer had any, like, I did have a couple of friends, and I was the
Mhm.
routine of getting up and going to school, but it's not the same when you're in homeschool. Even if you do have
Mhm.
your routine for your classes, you're at
Yeah.
home. And so it's
Mhm.
like I'm never leaving. And so you don't have that opportunity to get
Oppor
out as much unless
Right.
you actually have your
Mhm.
do things to make you a curriculum where you're going and doing things. But
Yeah.
so it can be very isolating, and yeah, it's either way has its ups and downs having done both, but
Mhm.
I've heard the arguments from some kids, that are adults now and felt like it was kind of culty and they weren't really allowed to
Right. Yeah.
live life like other kids, and so I can
Yeah.
see that being valid too. It's just it's a
Mhm.
personal experience.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, but it's just like, something needs to be done with this whole like matrix system and but I think kind of like getting back to the whole, going within, it's
Yes.
really going to require a lot of deep inner work on the not only the collective but people as individuals. And I think more and more people are coming around to it. It's just some people are still like wanting to stay stuck where they were at. And but then it's like you have to ask the question. It's just kind of like, do we hold space for, those people maybe knowing eventually they'll come around? But at the same time, like I said, you kind of have to focus on yourself and save yourself. Because, like I said, like nobody's coming to save you. Gen Alpha ain't gonna come save you because I know people like to love to say, oh, this next generation is gonna be what saves us. And it's just people said that about millennials, people said that about Gen Z, and I'm sure if you go further back, people were saying that about like Gen X and the boomers, and especially the boomers, because they were that Woodstock generation, that anti-war thing, but nope. So
Yeah,
that's the thing. Yeah. Yeah.
it's it's definitely come to a point, I feel like, that for the people that don't want to do it, the world's going to move on without them. A lot of people that are
Mhm.
kind of stuck in archaic mentalities are passing away. But
Mhm.
again, these are still things that in history we know have recurred, and it's
Yeah.
just like in as people move forward, you can't, like you said, you can't expect our kids to save us. We have to be
Mhm.
responsible for what's happening and take accountability for it, because
Right.
we're supposed to be the ones raising these kids. And
Yeah.
yeah, they're growing up and it's going to be their time to rule the world. And of course, my oldest daughter's almost 25, so I
Oh,
get
wow.
that. I see what I'm doing with myself because I don't feel like she should have to inherit that responsibility.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. And that's the thing too. It's like, why is the responsibility always placed on the next generation?
exactly.
Why not just take care of it right now? And that way the next generation can pick up the torch and continue on with, a much better world. And that I never that always bothered me when like people would be like, oh yeah, these young people, this next generation's gonna be who saves us. And it's like, no, again, like I said, I mean, as bleak as that sounds, nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself.
And then
So
when we do that and we work through
mhm.
those shadows, then we can come together to combat all of this together because we'll
Mhm.
collectively elevate. And that's basically
Yes.
what it's about. It's that consciousness of elevating to that level of where love is basically what conquers all. And we all inherently know that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what it comes down to is coming into a love consciousness instead of like a fear-based consciousness, which we've been in a fear-based consciousness for centuries now, you
We
know.
operating from that
Yeah.
lack, that not having, and
Hmm.
that has created that that gratification need that we have, the instant gratification, because we
Yeah.
constantly feel like we're not getting enough. We're constantly feeling like we have to do more or put more energy into something in order to just
Hmm.
get a little bit back. And even if we look at the warehouse fires, for example,
Right.
the quote is, all you had to do was pay us enough to live. And I'm not
Mhm.
endorsing it in any way. I'm just saying I understand that quote. I understand
Right.
that mentality. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily that these people are just psycho. It's that this is what happens when we live in a
Hmm.
society that has pushed that message for so long that everyone becomes so
Hmm.
desperate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why, we see so many people like, when is all this going to stop? And it's like,
We have
when
to stop it.
when we as a collective decide that it stops,
Exactly.
you know, that's all it is. Again, going back to the Man in the Mirror song, it's like, you have to take a look at yourself and make that change, and like I said, I think it's encouraging that we see more people doing that. But just other people need to kind of catch up. That's all. And hopefully they will, you know.
I mean,
Yeah.
ultimately, that is my hope too, because even when I
Hmm.
talk about this, there are people that are my loved ones that, were kind of bespelled by this. And
Yeah.
just because they were bespelled by this doesn't mean that I want them to be burnt up with it too.
Right.
It's honestly seeing the warehouse fires and all of this and the people that we've lost and everything
Yeah.
these are all signs that we all can see are not a good society. What
Right.
can we do to elevate ourselves individually
Hmm.
so that we can come to the table not to be who is above and who is the higher authority, but to be equals at the table discussing what needs
Yeah.
to be fixed.
Hmm. Yes. And I mean, well, that's how a lot of the ancient civilizations ran.
Yes,
I mean, you go back, I mean, the Druids, I've been doing a ton of studies on like the Druids, and at least like the information that we're able to gather about them, because they did not believe in, like, they never really wrote things down because they were orators, and they believed in like the art of storytelling and
tradition.
yes, oral tradition. So what we do know about the Druids was stuff that, people that were foreign to them came in and wrote down. But in the Druids, I mean, I think the Druids are like they had it right in many ways, because they believed in the masculine and the feminine, together jointly, both men and women, that could serve on like that, on like that kind of like that council that you were talking about. And I was also reading about like the and women, they could serve as priestesses, warriors. And I have this one book on the Morrigan, because I've also been doing a lot of
Okay.
studying on the Morrigan, the Celtic goddess. And her her like partner, the Dagda, who's supposed to also be her husband and everything. And and I love their story, how like they come together and they plot out like war strategy together, and
That's
they're
cool.
one unit during that time. And I'm like, that's the way it should be. And even with like the Celtic warriors, there were, some that were fighting the Celts actually said that the women were more fearsome than the male warriors, and what made the female warriors so so terrifying was the way they were able to use their voices, with their battle cries. And they also, people observed about Celtic women, Druid women, was that they were fierce on the battlefield, but when they were with their partner, their husband, who they would be submissive, feminine, because they felt safe
Yes.
with that man, you know and I'm just like, that is awesome, like that's the way it should be.
That's what we all really want, I think.
Yes, yes, and I'm just like, what? I wouldn't mind, like, like I said, I think in many ways the Druids, based on what we know about them, had it right, you know,
I
and
felt the same way about, like, the matrilineal society of, like, the Cherokees and how
mhm,
they had warrior women and it like, they had longhouses and it was very similar to, like, the Vikings, for example, in that way.
yeah,
If a man did something to upset his wife, she could just put his stuff outside of the longhouse and he was
I heard
divorced.
about that, yeah, mhm,
But the women were they had warrior women and they were the ones that ran mostly everything, which kind of goes back
mhm,
even further if you look at like the Battle of Themyscira and stuff like that.
yeah,
So if we really go back in our history, the
mhm,
matriarchy is the way that it worked the best. Mothers and
right,
women are the ones that nurture life. And again, if they
yeah,
feel safe and they're protected, if the men in
mhm,
the society are being the protectors, not the control dominant freaks, but
right,
actual protectors that understand,
mhm,
respect women and the value of the life that they bring. And then
yeah,
so they go out and they do things like hunt. They're able to get their testosterone out
mhm,
in those ways because they're
yeah,
protecting, but they're not
mhm,
around and trying to beat up their wife like we see
right,
nowadays. So
yeah,
a lot of these things, it's really, if you look at the natural way humanity works,
yeah,
we have just completely deviated from the course, and we could have a better
mhm,
world if and men really wouldn't be emasculated. It's they're so afraid
no,
that we're going to emasculate them, but they need to understand we are your mothers, you are our sons.
yeah,
We don't want to do that to you. Like that is
no,
something the patriarchy has taught you.
uh-huh, yeah,
Like
yeah, no, yeah, no, that's, I mean, yeah, exactly, because, you know, and that's the thing, like, the men, like Druid men, and like you mentioned, you know, like the Native American tribes, that it's like, oh, they were very masculine men. I mean, they weren't these, you know, these wimpy men that, you know, just hid behind a tree at the first sign of danger. No, these were powerful warrior men, but they also revered and respected, you know, the feminine, and, you know, women, and, you know, their mothers, their wives, their, you know, their daughters, and that's, you know, and that is a lot of what's missing right now. You know, that is just, it's really sad because, you know, and even coming from a spiritual perspective, you know, it said that the feminine is to, you know, protect the masculine in the spiritual realm, and the masculine is to protect the feminine in the physical realm. And there's just not a lot of that,
no.
you know?
And I think that that's something that even it goes back even to chess. The queen protects the king.
Mhm.
I feel like so many people have lost that as they feel like it's the queen is going to be this dominatrix just making them lick their
Right.
that's not realistic. Most women
No.
there are women who like that, yes, but most women, you know, we're here to we want to engage
Mhm.
and share our expressions and our ideas. And when it
Yeah.
comes to community and helping people, I feel that
Mhm.
most women, you know, we do want to be a part of that and be helpful where we can be. Not everyone. I
Yeah.
mean, all women are natural nurturers, and that's fine. But I
Mhm.
think a lot of women are, and if you really look at that, the aunties, for example, in native culture and stuff,
Yeah.
these people have been the ones that have been continually, it takes a village to raise a child. These little boys
Mhm.
need to remember that.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. But yeah, it's just, it's come, I think we've just become so disconnected, you know, from what we're naturally, I think, meant to be. And we've just, and it really has not, and I hate to be bleak about, you know, some of this stuff, but um
It's
it's
on.
so interesting. Yeah. But it's so interesting because I was listening to, and I don't know what made me start listening to this, but like, just one day, I think I was like doing my spring cleaning or whatever, and I was just kind of listening to some random stuff, and somehow this like interview with a divorce lawyer actually came on, and it was like one of those like relationship podcasts, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, this probably came on for a reason. Maybe I'm supposed to listen to it. But what was really interesting was I think there was like a divorce lawyer and then a counselor that counseled, people like post divorce and everything.
Right.
The amount of people that because the divorce lawyer and the counselor, they were like, okay, how many times do you think people, like, when do you think people actually in these marriages found out that, okay, this is not the right person? And, the person interviewing was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, maybe like a few years in or 10 years in. There's like, no, actually, the amount of people that say that they knew that this was not the right person before the wedding will will astound you.
How many
Because like people, it's like they end up, and I'm not saying, marriage is bad with the right person. I'm not anti-marriage for people out there to be like, oh, you're anti-marriage. No, I'm not. I'm anti-people getting with the wrong person, you know, and getting with somebody out of peer pressure, getting with somebody because it's somebody, oh, their friends, will approve or whatever. And in
expectations?
yeah, and in a way, it's still low key arranged marriages when you think about it, you know?
And I mean, I said something to a friend a few weeks ago, and they were
Hmm.
talking about someone, a situationship, if you will.
Yeah,
And I told them, I was like, if you go back to that, you're going to be settling. And they said, well, of
yeah.
course you would say that. And I said, no, I'm saying that because I already know that you're not happy. You already showed me
Hmm.
that you weren't happy. And from your own behaviors and out of your own mouth and your own experience, what you've confided in me, you already
Hmm.
know the answer that this person is not in alignment with your authentic self, but you're going to do what
Right.
you do.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the thing too is, and this is why I think it's so crucial for everybody to, from the time they're born, have that ability to truly get to know themselves, get to know what their, soul's blueprint is, get to know what their gifts are, get to know who they actually are as individuals, because then you can really take an educated look at an honest look at yourself and your life and be like, okay, what kind of a partner would suit me here? Like, or do I even want a partner? Or do I even want kids? And if so, how many? Because, if and then you can be a lot more discerning of who you end up with. And even, getting into a more spiritual perspective on it. I actually, I saw a post the other day saying that 90% of marriages today are karmic trauma bonds.
I would believe that.
Yeah, which to me, I'm like, well, that makes sense. We've given like high divorce rates, given, high,
Well,
or
the world consciousness isn't in that love factor.
yes, yes, getting back to that love factor, that love versus fear factor, people, getting together out of fear, like, oh my gosh, I'm 25, I'm not married yet, I need to keep up with the Jones. And that's the thing. It's like people are too worried about keeping up with the Joneses instead of really taking an authentic look at themselves and really seeing, okay, and yeah, just being honest. It's like, okay, does this person truly align with who I am authentically? And or if they don't, respectfully let them go, because by getting into a relationship with them, I'm also doing that person a disservice.
Yes,
I'm also preventing that person from actually finding somebody that's in perfect alignment with them,
exactly.
you
Exactly.
know? But a lot of people, don't. I mean, hopefully that's changing, but for the longest time, a lot of people didn't think like that,
Well, they're
and
saying there's a bit of a pandemic in dating now, and I think that that's
right.
relevant, especially post quarantine,
Mm-hmm.
and even talking about social media like we did at the start of the show, when we're
Yeah.
all kind of forced to only be able to connect that way, and how
Mm-hmm.
detached that made us.
Yes. Yes.
So we
Mhm.
were trying so hard to stay connected. And in a lot of
Mhm.
ways, like you said, no dissing on social media. It has its greats and its
Oh, yeah.
positives and its negatives. But if you look at everything that's happened up to
Mhm.
now we
Yeah.
are 6 years later, it really does, all of these little blocks make sense. And
Mhm.
again, it comes back down to that root of how much have we allowed to go on with
Yeah.
seeking that gratification and that ego stimulating dopamine, serotonin, whatever it is,
Yes.
that we've allowed to distract us so that these horrible things
Mhm.
continue to just be a pattern that's cycling for so many generations, that it's
Right.
so normal that it's been normalized. Like people just are like, oh,
Yeah.
this is just any given Tuesday. And that's what we have to really unpack.
Mhm.
No, this isn't normal. We shouldn't be
Right.
this way. We really do need to get back to doing community events, talking to
Mhm.
people, um, grassroots, even if you are someone who's wanting to get into politics, and
Mhm.
looking for the people that are there because they care about human interests, not because they care about glorified power.
Right. Yeah. No, I love that. Like, I definitely think that, we need to, yeah, just get back to having that sense of like purpose right there. And that might be the beginning of, you know, like allowing people to to heal their wounds and heal their shadows and alchemize their shadows into doing what it is they were meant to do, because I think that's another thing. A lot of people, like, they just don't know, so they don't know any better. So okay, yeah, I'm going to do what all my friends are doing or what my family tells me to do. And and it's very, it takes a lot of mental work, emotional work, spiritual work. It takes, physical work, too, keeping yourself as healthy as possible, and I mean, it's work. It's a lot of self-reverence and self-love, self-respect, but not from a narcissistic way where you think you're better than everybody.
It's
But yeah,
becoming vulnerable at the same time giving yourself grace. So like if you
yeah.
look at yourself, if you're a good pep talk person, which I feel you are, but I mean, if you look at yourself and you're like, I'm a person that people can come to and I'm pretty good at encouraging them, right?
Mhm.
What I chose to do when I really decided to go into this is I went in and I did the mirror thing. I looked myself in my reflection
Mm,
and I said, you put up with this and this is what, and I was crying. And this is what
right.
this has brought you to. But this
Mhm.
moment you're going to reclaim, and you don't ever have to allow this to happen again.
Right.
These are the things that you have to recognize in yourself that you allowed to happen, and that might be a
Mhm.
lot to deal with, but they
Yes.
never have to happen again. As soon as you recognize them and it becomes recognizance, you've learned the
Mhm.
lesson, and that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I am, a believer in, what happened to you is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to work through it and see. And you know and I don't think it's not victim blaming to maybe see, okay, where maybe did I play a role in this,
And
where did I have a wound
I did have a little bit of an issue with people saying that. Like when I was younger, people would tell me all the time, well, you're an overcomer. And I would be like offended, like, what are you saying? That I should deserve to go through this because of that? Like, but now I really started to realize, that's not really a diss, and it's not necessarily someone saying,
right.
oh, well, it is kind of gaslighty in a way. But at the
Mhm.
same time, when I started to unpack it, I was like, well, what were things that were wrong with me that I didn't get therapy for that made it
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
I perceived that certain actions were acceptable, or made me feel like I needed to accept this
Right.
as
Mhm.
the only amount of, love or whatever it was that
Yeah.
I was seeking. Um,
Yeah.
and I realized that no, none of my abusers are totally responsible for what they did. I will not take
Yeah.
accountability for what I did not do.
Mhm.
But my naivety and my not recognizing, because I used to be like, oh, therapy's
Mhm.
not going to do any good for me. I'm not the one
Right.
that's out here doing these things. It's other people doing.
Yeah.
And then my therapist actually said something. She goes, 90% of people that come to therapy are the ones that are seeking help from the ones that have been abused. The abusers aren't usually the ones that come in seeking therapy. But they
Right.
convince you that it's not needed, and you start to
Mhm.
believe what your abuser's telling you. Therapy's not
Yeah.
going to do any good for you anyway, you know.
Right.
Like, people are the way they are, and you get into that mindset. And when you get
Mhm.
into a mindset, that's
Mhm.
what it is. You are setting your mind there.
Yeah.
And until
Yeah.
you break it open and you're like, "Wait, you don't have that power over me?" Quote, Labyrinth. It
Yeah.
it is. It's like you're stuck in a maze of not knowing, going around and around trying to escape, and you don't know how to do it until you have that epiphany and you're like,
Yeah.
"Wait, I don't have
Mhm.
to do that, and just because these things happen doesn't
Right.
mean they have to continue to happen. Now what can I do?" Once you come to
Right.
that point is where you can really go, "What can I do to change?
Exactly.
What do I need to face?" And once
Mhm.
you're in that dark night of the soul, I think that's honestly the
Yeah.
best time to really reflect on that.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And
But up to go.
oh yeah, hey, but yeah, but the thing and and with me it was about finding, okay, like some certain wounds that like I was holding on to that was making me not recognize red flags, and
Yeah.
and it was my responsibility to do that digging and bring that to the surface. And it was in a past episode with my friend Susanna Sprague. We were talking about, because she and I, like, we talk about like shadow work and all that stuff all the time on here. And she's coming back on, and we're going to do like a fire horse year follow up type of thing. But like, but yeah, but we were talking about, and I was talking about how like The Shining is one of my all time favorite novels. I love, I like both movie versions in their own way. Both the Kubrick version, I mean, it's brilliant. And
I've seen
then,
it, so
oh yeah. And then even the Mick Garris version, the TV movie that came out. I mean, even that,
wasn't
I know that I know a lot of people poke fun of that now, because like when you compare it to the Kubrick version, it's like, okay, yeah, the Kubrick version kind of wins. But but in that, but even that one, there were just little, like, just nuggets in there that, I was like, wow, I relate to that with like my own experiences and everything. And The Shining was actually a huge part of like my own shadow work, because and then its sequel Doctor Sleep was another one. And especially when a grown-up Danny Torrance returns to the Overlook, not to give any spoilers for people that didn't see it yet, but I do recommend watching Doctor Sleep, the movie. Very well done.
very good.
um but for me it's like, you know returning to when he returned to the Overlook, that kind of, and and Susanna and I would discuss this. It's like that kind of made me kind of be like, okay, well, what's my Overlook?
Exactly.
And I knew what my Overlook was. And it's like synchronicity, because I visited my own Overlook, at the age of 5, which is the same age that Danny Torrance was at, had, all of that stuff at the Overlook Hotel when he was a kid. And, and it was, and my Overlook, it's in California. And I visited it once when I was like 5 years old. And it was like, it was one of those things where it was like this, it was kind of like disguised at this as this like beacon of light, but underneath it all, like like years later I found out just like how much, like, like dark stuff was there, and and everything. It was just, and maybe one day I'll share the whole story, but it's something I'm still kind of digesting and everything. But like, but yeah, but it was, it was very like that book for me. And those movies like were a huge part of like my shadow work and making me just really dig stuff up. Like, did you have like a piece of work or anything that did that for you? Like, do you have an Overlook, if you will? So
I have had metaphysical and paranormal experiences.
Yes, girl.
And some of them, okay, so as far as stories are concerned, I haven't
Mhm.
know any direct references towards this, but there are things that have happened that have fallen into my stories. For example, I
Mhm.
did a short story 2 years ago called A Toddling Mystery, and it's
Mhm.
loosely based off the Ostara myth. Um,
Okay.
and I don't want to give away too many things, but the little girl that they find in this book, she's
Mhm.
basically found by CPS wandering.
Okay.
And she's brought to this adoption agency that works with people that have a similar kind of background as like
Mhm.
Elaine Maxwell. And I
Mhm.
really wrote it based off of the fact when I was in foster care and the things that
Okay.
some of the things I seen on different
Mhm.
types of people that I seen come through the facilities. Um,
Yeah.
I had to do supervised visitation with my parents for a little while. And I do
Mhm.
want to say my mom did not lose her kids for anything she did wrong. My mom was actually a
Mhm.
victim of DV, and she lost her children
Mhm.
because they tried to charge her with failure to protect because of us witnessing the
Oh gosh. Yeah.
so she had to go through a bunch of things to get her kids back, but she didn't actually do anything to us
Mhm.
to lose her kids. Um,
Yeah.
but that opportunity, I mean, that situation, if you will,
Mhm.
and writing a toddling mystery, I kind of drew in from those situations and different things that I,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
as far as like the overlook question,
Yeah.
so my I've always had some, like, weird kinda sense, if you will, and the first time
Mhm.
my mom said that I actually made any kind of statements that made it seem like I might be clairvoyant or something, I was, like, 4
Yeah.
years old, and,
Mhm.
um, there's a place here called Veneta, Oregon, and that's where the Oregon Country Fair is held,
Mhm.
which is pretty internationally known. Um,
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with, like, the Grateful Dead and people like that. Um,
Right.
so my mom knew some of these people and we happened to be in Veneta and she took me to this store. And it's a
Mhm.
store that I have went back to since. I actually lived in Veneta for a while and the store was literally a block away. So I
Yeah.
did go back.
Mhm.
But what happened was my mom took me to the store and the idea was we were supposed to be going inside to get a snack or something and then go into the river or the
Uh-huh.
lake to swim.
Yeah.
And my mom's walking me up, I can remember it too, like, my mom's walking me up, and there was these big, heavy wooden doors on this convenience store. They're not there now, they've
Mhm.
since been turned into this swinging glass doors, but
Yeah.
they used to be these big, heavy wooden doors, and I stopped, and I stared at them, and I looked at my mom, and she's like, "Come on, let's go," and I said,
Mhm.
"No, I don't wanna go in there. This is a bad place, something bad happened here."
Yeah.
And she just
Mhm.
looks at me and she's all, "What do you mean?" And I said,
Mhm.
"I don't so there's something bad happened here. I don't wanna go in there. I don't wanna go in there."
Mhm.
And I was, like, adamant that I didn't wanna go in there. She made me
Right.
go in there because she was
Oh,
going to
wow.
leave me out because
Yeah.
it's 4, and she was like, "Oh,
Mhm.
just come on, you know, we're just getting a drink and nothing's gonna get you, mama's with you," kinda thing.
Yeah.
Um, which, I mean, in retrospect, I understand.
Mhm.
We went in there and I just remember just standing as close to her, like looking around, just like this is like trying to shrink myself, crossing my arms,
Uh-huh.
not feeling good
Yeah.
being until we finally left. Well, years later, obviously, like I just told you, the Oregon Country Fair happens there, and it's something
Right.
I do support, but there's also things that have happened that are not so good. And I mean,
Mhm.
with any kind of festival activity, especially when we have hippies and we have, you know, psychedelics, things can,
Yeah.
you know, these are just things that and then different spiritual beliefs, and there are all
Mhm.
types of practitioners who do things at the camps, and
Yeah.
things happen. So, I think now and I went back to the store, I even actually worked at that store for a little while, that's how
Mhm.
much I went back and was like, "I'm gonna face my fears," and
Yeah.
there was no more any sense of darkness or impending doom, but I think that
Right.
it's because I already understood the land, I had learned about
Mhm.
what had happened there, and when I was 4, I didn't have any understanding of that, I just know that I felt
Right.
energy, and the energy
Yeah.
was
Mhm.
scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty intense. Like especially because, as kids, it's like our sixth sense is heightened and but then it's like as you grow into adulthood and again, you get into that fear system, of this, this matrix and everything. You get into that fear system and then, I wouldn't say it's lost, but I would say it's dormant.
There's like a veil that
You know,
comes down and you do
yes.
because like your antenna isn't as, susceptible to it. But for
Yeah.
me, it never really went away. I went through a period
Yeah.
where I kind of like I didn't really necessarily believe in my gifts. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
It's like
Right.
I didn't think I was anything special. And I'm not saying like I'm a chosen one special. I'm not psychic. I can get kind of feelings about things in certain scenarios.
Right.
I have seen a ghost. That happened to me
Mhm.
at Hasita Head Lighthouse here in Oregon when I
Oh,
was
wow.
10 years old. Um,
Uh-huh.
and real quickly, I can tell you what happened. We went up
Yeah.
there and it was supposed to be an afternoon picnic on the beach there because
Mhm.
it's an overlook lighthouse and a bed and breakfast, but there's also a beach
Okay.
and it's got, it's really pretty for sunsets and stuff like that. So my mom,
Mhm.
me and my brother and sister, we were going to have a beach day and just a picnic on the
Mhm.
beach, hang out, beachcomb and stuff like that. And she had
Mhm.
taken my little brother and sister down to spread out the blanket and pick out the spot. And I was supposed to be bringing the cooler from her hatchback and carrying
Right.
it down. Well, as she's went to go walk down the beach, I go to the back of the car to get the cooler
Uh-huh.
out. And the way that the house is up there, it's like there's this hill and it sits like
Mhm.
this, and you can see the bay windows from the parking lot.
Okay, yeah.
And it was actually shut down at this time because they were doing construction to fix the bed and breakfast to make it better,
Uh-huh.
renovate it.
Yeah.
Um, I actually noticed movement in the side of like my peripherals.
Oh, wow.
I looked up and I seen a woman in the bay window
Mhm.
and she wasn't scary or anything, Tiffany. She just looked
Yeah.
melancholy. And she was
Uh-huh.
dressed with, the Victorian high blouse with the brooch cameo,
Yeah.
the high
Mhm.
bun, and she was, the buttons perfectly aligned, and she was just kind of standing at the
Oh,
window,
wow. Yeah.
somber, staring at me.
Uh-huh.
And I must have been in a trance because
Yeah.
I don't know how much time went by. It felt like it was
Right.
like maybe 2 minutes or something. But my mom come up and she's all, "Hey, what's going on? Are you
Yeah.
okay?" And I looked at her and I was like, "You don't see her?" And I pointed, and as no sooner as my mom turns to look, she vanished.
Mhm. Wow. Huh.
That is the ghost of Virgo,
Yeah.
actually in Time magazine, and you can go.
Wow.
It's actually many people have seen her and dealt with her, even during the renovations.
Mhm.
There were stories about her. It's one of the most famous hauntings on the Oregon coast. But at that
Yeah.
time, like, I mean, I had heard the lighthouse was haunted, just
Uh-huh.
passing. And I mean, I've always been interested in gothic stuff and horror stories,
Oh,
obviously,
yeah.
but I didn't take
Mhm.
it seriously. I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's haunted, whatever. I
Mhm.
had that experience. And I mean, I've hiked up there and I've been up there and it's one of my favorite beaches. I have
Yeah.
never seen her again since, but I can feel her
Uh-huh.
presence. And it's not like it doesn't feel somber though. It's like when I'm
Mhm.
there, I can feel her presence. It's almost like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm here. Like
Of
I'm here.
course.
And it's she doesn't mess with you or anything. Like she has pulled pranks on people in the past, like when they were doing
Right.
renovations, but she's not like a malicious or a nefarious, ghost.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. That's so cool. Yeah, just I love Gothic Victorian stuff too, obviously, and yeah. Oh man, that's up my alley. And yeah, but like, with all that said, especially, with your, like with your writing, whether it's your fictional works, or your commentary works, is like what message do you like say this is, 100, or at least what we perceive to be 100 years from now, if you really want to get metaphysical, that we're not even in the right calendar and all that stuff. But, but let's say it's a really long time from now. What message would you like to hopefully, leave behind, with your works, whether it's with your fictional works, your commentary, things like that.
Well, if there's one thread through everything I do, it's
Hmm.
authenticity over performance. So
Right.
I'm ultimately here to inspire, educate, and entertain generations.
Hmm.
I want my people to walk away feeling that growth is messy and that
Uh-huh.
resilience isn't about never failing. It's about
Right.
the grit that it takes to stand back up, to face the shadows,
Yeah.
and I hope to put out a message that honors the raw, unfiltered human experience, the stories that
Hmm.
choose to direct humble action, over performative gestures that bring us into being our truly authentic selves and
Yeah.
loving ourselves as those people.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, because I think, we need more of that. Absolutely. Because there's just so much of people just not knowing who they are, like who their authentic self is. And I think that's why so many people have a hard time loving themselves. It's because you're trying to love a false version of yourself. And you were not meant to do that. And once you start to, and I love how you brought up that growth is messy. It's not like, and I don't know if you've ever seen that, little graph online. It's like what people think success looks like versus what it actually is, and what people think it looks like, it's this neat little straight line, and then what it actually is, it's a line but then like a scribble, like kind of like this big scribble knot, and then the line. So but yeah, but that's growth right there. And and that's one thing that I've been doing with even something, even implementing something as simple as like the Eisenhower matrix into like my planning system. you know you're not going to get it perfect right away. Some things that you put in the important urgent category actually belongs in the important not urgent category or something like that. But it's the fact that you keep doing it, because messy action is better than no action.
Exactly.
you know
And
yeah.
that's exactly it. Healing is not linear. It's a cycle. You're
Right.
brought back to moments where you're going, I thought I had already come over this. Why am I going back to my same
I
old
hear
mess?
you. Oh my goodness. Yes, I hear you. Yeah, because it's just, yeah, because you're like, wait a minute. I thought I've already like dealt with this and, healed this, but no, there might still be a little, I mean, yeah, you might have dealt with it and healed it to a large degree, but there might still be a little bit of that still lingering in there. And when it comes up, no, you didn't fail. No, it just means that, okay, there's still like an old wound there that just needs to either be released or alchemized and channeled into, a creative work, or, channeled into, following your purpose.
Yes, and the transmutation is a huge thing. For those of you who haven't heard about that, if you do have that level of pain, I know it can
Yeah.
seem easy to hold on to it, but if you can transmute it, it becomes a fuel that can carry you to places that you've never even conceived.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. No, I am 100% in agreement with that. And okay, but speaking of your writing, do you have any new books or new works coming out? Because you do have some really good fictional work out there as well.
I definitely have my hands full with so many works in progress, but in the pipeline right now, I just released Dust Traces Never Fade in March, which is the sequel to The Softer Side of Texas. And
Oh, I remember the softer side of Texas. Yeah.
so Ivy and Aaron are back, but this time the stakes are a little different as their 2-year-old daughter is kidnapped. And it's a
Ooh.
retaliation game. So if you know the first book,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of know how those two people are. Now imagine their
Yeah.
daughters at one of the stakes. Um,
Uh-huh.
so yeah, it's a fun one, but I'm going to actually be developing a third installment to make it a full trilogy, and it'll
Oh,
probably be out by next spring. That's going to be titled Grit Beneath the Grace. Um,
okay.
and then I have a couple, like Simply Scarlet's been out for a while, and I've had half of Tarnished Turquoise written for a long time, but
Ooh.
I had a publisher that I didn't see eye to eye with, and I had to get my rights back, but that's been well established and over, and I got.
Yeah.
But because of that, I relaunched Simply Scarlet with a new publisher,
Uh-huh.
and I also did the same thing with Softer Side of Texas and Embracing His Empire. But
Yeah.
each of those, I made the agreement that I would make a trilogy. So we've already done the Softer Side of Texas's sequel, so that's book 2, and then
Right.
I've done the releases, the relaunches of
Uh-huh.
Scarlet and Embracing His Empire, but I have to do 2 more books in each of those series. And I've already got a
Mhm.
plot outlined and I've already started working on them somewhat, but I'm kind of keeping a little bit of the details. I don't really have an ETA on when exactly they're going to be published because it's
Mhm.
each one at a time and there's so many other projects I'm also doing. But I intend on getting those 3 done
Mhm.
within the next, like year to 18 months. And then I actually just finished of Masters and Slaves and I put that on Ream as a serial, but it's been
Oh.
as a serial for like maybe 6 weeks, and I'm probably gonna end
Uh-huh.
up taking it all and publishing it as, a whole
Yeah.
story. Now
Mhm.
that it's, been out there, and I figure I'll probably do that in May. It's something I've got as my next one I want to do to be the next release. But of course, that one's an independent, not with my publisher. So I'm doing the whole hybrid thing still. And
Yeah.
as far as what is going on, if you want to keep up with my journey or dive into any of my books,
Yeah.
all available through most major retailers now. That I even have some of my books on Walmart shelves. I've actually made that happen, so I'm happy about that. And of course, my Amazon author page, and then the podcasts. You can
Mhm.
find me on Histories of Horror. It's bi-weekly with my co-host AL Knuckles, which is
I
also,
was on that one.
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
She's also one of my co-authors. She co-wrote with me on Snowden.
Uh-huh.
Or no, wait. Snowden was the anthology that we were in. The story is actually called Frosted Dreams, but that was the one
Yeah.
we featured in together.
Mhm.
So there's Histories of Horror. This is on Spotify or wherever you guys listen to podcasts. And this is a true
Uh-huh.
crime, paranormal, supernatural. And then, of course, we did have Tiffany on a special because we were
Yeah.
doing like a spooky week,
Mhm.
talking to different people that come from different types of gothic and horror and, just kind of
Yeah.
intersectional story types.
Mhm. That was
So there's
fun.
that one. And
Mhm.
then The Mind of Sai Marie, which is my solo podcast. And I usually put out, about 3 or 4 episodes a week, just depending on what I'm doing. When I was in LA,
Yeah.
obviously I didn't do any, but I did come back
Right.
with follow-ups about what happened there if anybody wants to hear more about that. Um, and then, of course, there's Around the Table with the AOTR, which is the Authors of the Resistance podcast. And I do that
Mhm.
every other Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific time with my co-host, author Beverly L. Anderson, who is also a mental health specialist. Um,
Mhm.
and we just talk about intersectional topics there, from activism to obviously the
Right.
name Authors of the Resistance. We are
Uh-huh.
very much trying to stand up for the First Amendment, for free speech, for free press,
Yeah.
um,
Mhm.
fighting back against, trying all of the different censorship that they've been doing to all of us, um,
Yeah.
and trying to, basically crash our careers as romance or erotic authors. Um,
Right.
but, all those different types of things because we've got book banning happening. So all of
Maybe
that.
they need to read a little romance and erotica, you know? It's like
And the thing is, I know that we need to keep spaces that are for children. Those need to
Yeah.
be protected, especially
Mhm.
considering
Absolutely.
everything. And we're in the transparency era with everything that's happened with Epstein. But at the same time,
Yes.
we cannot, the purity culture has done no good. This is the reason why we have
Right.
so many, assaults and things is because of
Mhm.
culture. So we have to be doing things in a way where we understand that adults should be able to consent to purchasing and viewing the materials
Right.
they want to. It's not for me to judge what you like.
Yeah.
As long as it's with a consenting person that's of sound mind and not a child, it's none of my business.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And, the rise of corn, we
Yeah.
know what that is. That's, I mean, I think purity culture has, really contributed to the rise of that, And yeah, because if you try to keep people in a straitjacket for so long, it's only a matter of time before they find a way to act out. And when they act out, it's never in a healthy way, you know.
because they've been, kind of just like kept in this restriction. And
Yeah.
so when they finally do go on an impulse, it usually is on an impulse. And that's when we end up with some terrible crimes at times.
Right. Exactly. No, I totally hear you there, but oh my gosh, girl, what a discussion. We kind of went off script too, but you know what? That's okay because, I mean, even when at the time I'm recording this, also yesterday, recorded Zach from Death Comes Lifting's, podcast too. And, I mean, and I was even telling him, yeah, I send people questions just to kind of give like some structure to the discussion. But you know what? If it goes off in another direction, it was probably meant to. You know,
And
there was probably somebody who needed to hear what all that you had to say, so I'm not like super strict about that. So,
right. I think that, having them scripted to your questions and everything to a point, but also I do the
mhm,
same thing on my shows is I want to keep it in your words. So when it
yeah,
becomes an organic conversation, then you know that it's authentic and
exactly.
that, what's being said is actually coming from the true source, the person that you're talking to, and it's not just their pre-thought, it's actually them intelligently communicating with you in that moment. And I kind of like to have those a little bit myself too.
Yeah, yeah. And and that's the thing, because it's going back to authentic conversations that sometimes may not be the most comfortable conversations,
It's
but they're conversations that need to be had nonetheless. And even if like somebody listen, hey, you may not agree 100% with what the person I'm talking to is saying, but you know what? At least what I would hope is that it gave you a look at a different perspective and it made you think, oh, maybe there's another side to that. Maybe there's a side that I haven't been hearing, and I want to find out more about that. And to me, that's important. And you know what? Discussion is how real change happens. Authentic discussion. That is how real change happens. Exchanging of ideas is how real change happens,
yes.
And I mean, even, going all the way back to the American Revolution, I'm a history buff, I mean, Thomas Paine, hello, common sense, that, that was discussion that was being distributed throughout all the taverns or they were also called orderlies and everything that were being distributed and those discussions were happening and, and those exchanging of ideas and that's what, like I said, like that's where real change happens is when you can have adult discussions and really, get different perspectives on what, on how somebody might view things. And because when you live in a think tank, that's never helped anyone, you know being in just this bubble that, where you're basically told what to believe. It's like, no, get to the root of yourself. What do you honestly believe?
Yeah.
Because, and I'm sure you've heard this too, the vast majority of a person's thoughts aren't even their own. you know?
Oh, and that goes back. There's a book that I feel like we should talk about briefly, and that is The
hmm
Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Oh, I've
And
heard of that. Yeah.
if you haven't read it, Tiffany, you should read it. It's a short book,
Uh-huh.
but it's a great one. And he talks about the it's basically like the spells that other people put on you, or the delusions other people put on you, which is basically
Yeah.
projection. And it's
hmm
him talking about all these ideas or beliefs or even the faiths. These are things that are put on top of you, usually
Right.
whoever is raising you to start with, and then the society that you are, brought into as you move through
Yeah.
it. And according to, whatever your station is within that, you might get
hmm
different messages, but all of those are agreements that you're making. And so he talks about
hmm
when you start to actually break the agreements and you start to go, well, what are
hmm
agreements about me? What is my personal code?
Yeah.
Even know what those are, and you're just making these agreements with whatever is being told to you. Yeah, okay,
Right.
sky is purple because Trump says so. You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, I believe that. You're making that agreement and you're not even
Right.
actually looking at the fact that the sky is actually colorless. It's just,
Right.
know, of
Yeah.
whatever refraction of light we're seeing
Yeah.
to the clouds in the sky and the
Yeah.
sunlight, right? Or the moonlight, if that's the case. But people don't really often think about how many things were just placed upon them
Hmm.
to actually step back and go, is this something I actually believe in myself?
Right. Yeah. Hmm. No, I agree. Yeah, I'm totally with that because, you know, and that was, even with my own inner work, that I really was, taking a step back and being like, okay, is this really what I believe? Or what is this something that I was told to believe, from authority figures. And, and that is when you can have that honest conversation with yourself, that is when you are, on your way to truly living, your soul's blueprint, truly living, what, you as, a sentient being came here to do, and yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, this was quite a deep discussion, but I think it, definitely, like I said, we definitely went off script, but, I think there was a reason for that. I think, there might be somebody out there that needed to hear this. And, and I think that, and I'm always glad to have these types of discussions and, the sharing of ideas and, how can we all come together as a collective and really, make a change in this world. And, and I think that, I think I think it's going to be a struggle, but I think we're starting to head in that direction,
It does feel like we're at that. It feels like the fire horse is really starting to get into that gallop.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and it was really awesome talking to you, and just hearing a little more about your background and your story and where you came from and like because your time in foster care, I didn't know that, so that was like really really fascinating and really like I said, thank you for sharing that on here, and and it was really truly awesome to have you on. And yeah, but where can people find you? Where can people find you again? Like, what are your handles?
I am most active lately on Instagram and Facebook,
Hmm.
but it's pretty easy to find me. My On Instagram, it's at author Sai Marie. That's
Hmm.
AUTHORSAIMARIE. All one
Hmm.
word, and I know they don't run together.
Yeah.
I'm on TikTok, and that's at Sai.Marie Johnson. Marie Johnson would be together.
Hmm.
Pretty much if you look up author Sai Marie or Sai Marie Johnson, you're going to be able to find me. I'm pretty active, as you know. Um, and of course, I do have a Facebook reader group too. That's Sirens of Sai Marie.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I think I'm in that Facebook group. So that Sirens of Sai Marie. Awesome. So, all right, we'll definitely look up Sai Marie, look up her books. She has pretty much everything from like gothic fiction to, erotica to like a sweet, the sweet romance type. I mean, she has pretty much everything. She's definitely a hybrid author, which I think is really cool. And also, if you want to, just get to know her a little bit more personally, you can follow her on like Substack
Yep.
and listen to her podcasts in the Mind of Sai Marie. Listen to her horrors of history, right?
Histories of horror. It's
Histories
I
of horror.
yes.
Yeah, I was on that podcast and I got
Yes.
it mixed up. But yeah, but if you like true crime and just really cool things like that, listen to that podcast. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everybody for watching. Both my podcasts have been experiencing surges in downloads, which makes me happy. So thank you so much. You all are awesome. But this was another episode of the After Hours Chats podcast. And this time we had on Sai Marie Johnson. And as always, I leave you with stay fierce, stay safe, but stay spooky.
Oh, yeah.
Woo! Yes.